The nylon line had been spooling out for 9 hours, descending past the point where the laws of physics should have snapped the string under its own weight. Mel Waters stood at the edge of a 9-foot-wide throat in the earth, his hands raw and bleeding from handling miles of fishing line. He watched 80,000 feet of real vanish into a darkness that refused to return even the faintest echo. This was not a typical sinkhole or a forgotten mineshaft. It was a jagged wound in the crust of Washington state, a localized impossibility tucked away on private property near Ellensburg. To stand at its lip was to feel a primal conflict between the safety of the solid earth and the terrifying lure of a vacuum that should not exist. There was no sound of a splash, no thud of a lead weight hitting solid ground, and most unsettling of all, no reflection of light. It was as if the hole were not just deep, but hungry. In the winter of 1997, the world first heard of this anomaly through a series of crackling radio transmissions. Mel Waters described a site that locals had reportedly used as a convenient trash pit for generations. They threw in rusted appliances, old tires, and even the carcasses of dead livestock, yet the hole never seemed to reach capacity. It never smelled of decay or emitted the foul gases one would expect from a massive pile of rotting refuse. According to the accounts, it simply consumed whatever was offered, drawing the debris into an endless, silent gullet. But the mystery deepened when Mel decided to measure it. Using heavy-duty reels and weighted lines, he expected to hit a floor within a few hundred feet. Instead, he went through reel after reel, mile after mile, until the depth reportedly surpassed 15 miles. This is deeper than the cruising altitude of a commercial airliner, reaching into a part of the Earth's mantle where the immense pressure and heat should have rendered any hollow space physically impossible according to standard geological models. Mel's obsession grew with every inch of line that disappeared into the void. He stopped sleeping, spending his nights at the edge of the pit, listening to the silence that felt heavy, as if the air itself were being pulled into the dark. He noticed that his dogs, usually loyal and brave, refused to go within dozens of yards of the rim. They would dig their claws into the dirt, their fur standing on end as they whimpered at an invisible threat that only their instincts could perceive. The tension escalated when he brought a radio near the edge. It wouldn't play local stations. Instead, it allegedly emitted voices from the past or strange, rhythmic pulsing that sounded like a massive mechanical heart beating deep within the earth. This was the first hint that the hole was perhaps not just a geological fluke, but a structure that defied modern understanding of the planet's interior, a rhythmic, industrial presence residing where there should only be molten rock. The most haunting aspect of the legend involves the account of a neighbor who reportedly threw the remains of his deceased dog into the pit. Sometime later, the man claimed to have seen the same dog running through the woods near the ridge. It didn't acknowledge him when he called its name. It didn't bark or show any sign of domestic recognition. It simply moved with a strange, fluid precision, its eyes reflecting a light that didn't belong in the natural world. This sparked a terrifying question: if the hole could take life, could it also give it back? If something was being reconstructed in those depths, it suggested a biological process occurring miles beneath the feet of the residents, one that viewed the surface as a source of raw material for an uncanny recreation of life. The animal that returned was described as having a perfect gait, too precise to be natural, suggesting that whatever recreated it didn't quite understand the subtle imperfections of a living being. Mel became a man possessed, his conversations increasingly frantic as he shared his findings with the public. He wasn't just a landowner anymore, he was a witness to something that shouldn't exist. He spoke of a medical feeling to the air near the hole, a sterile, cold scent that didn't belong in the woods. This suggested that the hole wasn't just a natural formation, but a maintained environment, perhaps a ventilation shaft or an access port for something far more sophisticated than a cave system. The conflict between his need to know and the hole's refusal to be known consumed his life savings and his sanity. He began to feel a sense of being watched, not from the trees, but from the void below. Every time he leaned over the edge, he He felt a pull, a subtle gravity that wasn't just physical, but psychological, a beckoning from the deep that whispered of a world within a world. As the story gained traction in the late 90s, the conflict shifted from the paranormal to the terrestrial. Mel claimed that shortly after his public disclosures, he was approached by individuals who reportedly possessed a chilling level of authority. They informed him that the land was being seized due to a classified environmental hazard involving the local water table. His access was cut off, and the physical evidence became increasingly difficult to verify as the area was cordoned off from the public. Satellite imagery of the coordinates on Manistash Ridge began to show a strange phenomenon. The area where the hole should have been appeared as a blurred, blacked-out square. This digital bandage, applied by mapping providers, only fueled the fire of public curiosity. If the hole was merely a deep cave, the sudden administrative silence and the masking of geographic data created a narrative of suppression as deep as the hole itself. This silence highlights a fundamental conflict, the human desire for discovery versus the institutional need for control over the unknown. Geologists argue that a hole 15 miles deep is physically impossible because the heat and pressure of the Earth's crust would cause the walls to collapse or flow like plastic. Yet, the reports of the hole persisted, supported by those who claimed to have seen it before the lockdowns. This leads to the staggering possibility of a hollow Earth or a series of massive, self-sustaining subterranean cavities. If such a space exists, it would mean that our understanding of planetary formation is fundamentally incomplete. It suggests a dark mirror of our own ecosystem that has remained shielded from the sun for eons, functioning beneath a crust we assumed was solid and predictable. Imagine a structural void maintained by something other than rock and soil, an ancient piece of geoengineering that follows its own rules of physics. The psychological toll on Mel Waters was profound. He eventually disappeared from the public eye, claiming he had been relocated and silenced, though these claims remain part of the legend rather than established fact. The narrative he left behind is one of profound displacement. To stand over a bottomless pit is to face the ultimate vulnerability. It is the realization that the ground beneath our feet, the very symbol of stability, may be a fragile crust floating over a dark, hungry vacuum. The conflict lies in the tension between our arrogance as the dominant species on the surface and the primal fear of what might be residing in the silence of the deep earth. Mel's final public statements were those of a man who realized that the bottomless nature of the hole was not just physical, but a hole in his reality that he could never fill. In the years following the original reports, others claimed to have found similar vocal holes in Nevada and parts of the Australian outback. They described similar traits: the silencing of animals, the interference with electronic equipment, and the sense of a presence rising from the depths. Some believe these holes are natural wormholes, points where gravity behaves differently, allowing for a folding of space that makes the depth appear infinite. Others see them as biological entities, breathing pores of a living planet that we have only begun to irritate with our curiosity. The danger here isn't just falling in, it's the ideological collapse that happens when we realize we aren't the primary inhabitants of this planet. We are merely the surface dwellers, living on the roof of a much larger, much older house. Every time a new satellite map is released, enthusiasts scour the Washington wilderness for a glimpse of the stone rim. They look for the telltale signs of restricted cordons, unusual seismic readings, or permanent military presence. But the forest remains tight-lipped. The rhythmic pulsing reported by Mel suggests a mechanical heart or a massive industrial process that doesn't beat for us. It beats for the darkness, maintaining a world that has no need for the sun or the creatures that walk in its light. This transforms the hole from a geological curiosity into a predatory threshold, where the conflict is between the organic life of the surface and the cold, reconstructed life of the depths. We see a void, the entity below sees a home. The debate between a geological anomaly and a portal remains unresolved. Science demands physical evidence, a core sample, a camera feed, or a GPS coordinate that can be visited by a neutral party. But every time technology is reportedly sent down, the accounts say it fails. Cameras return static. Sensors flatline. It is as if the hole has an immune response to being observed, or perhaps the electromagnetic interference is so great that no surface technology can survive the descent. This resistance to being known is what makes the legend of Mel's Hole a true dark thriller. It is a mystery that fights back. It is a conflict between human curiosity and the silent, cold reality of the deep earth, where our tools are useless and our light is swallowed whole. As we navigate the fine line between folklore and suppressed truth, the lack of verifiable evidence doesn't necessarily mean the hole doesn't exist. It may simply mean it exists in a way that our current framework cannot process. If a hole has no bottom, it challenges the very concept of direction. It suggests a loop, a cycle, or a bypass of three-dimensional space. The inner world might not be a physical cavity in the traditional sense, but a different state of matter entirely, accessible only through these rare, terrifying scars in the land. To investigate is to risk finding a truth that we are not prepared to handle, a truth that would render our maps and our histories obsolete. The ground remains a closed book, and Mel Waters may have been a messenger who stumbled upon a secret the planet wasn't ready to share. The shadows on Manistash Ridge do not move like the shadows in the city. There is a weight to them, a density that suggests they are not just the absence of light, but a presence of their own. For those who still search for the hole, every uneven patch of ground is a potential threshold. Every silence in the woods is a breath held by something miles below. The risk of the unknown is the only constant in the story of Mel's Hole, a narrative that begins with a simple fishing line and ends with the realization that we may be the only ones on this planet who think the ground is solid. The hole is a reminder that the dark doesn't just hide things, it builds them, refines them, and waits for them to rise. If the reports are true, the physics of the hole suggest a structure that defies the geothermal gradient. At 15 miles deep, the temperature should be high enough to melt lead, yet the fishing line reportedly remained intact and the air felt cool. This implies either a localized cooling effect or a protective casing that insulates the shaft from the surrounding magma. Such a feat would require technology far beyond our current capabilities, or a biological adaptation that thrives on the very heat we find lethal. The conflict is no longer just between man and nature, but between two different definitions of what is natural. The mystery of the earth will continue to haunt the edges of our reality, a cold draft blowing up from a hole that should not be there. The silence of the ridge, the blurred squares on the digital maps, and the memory of a fishing line that vanished into the dark, these are the fragments of a story that refuses to die. It is a story about the danger of looking too closely at the cracks in the world. Because once you know the hole is there, you can never quite trust the ground again. You start to wonder if the vibrations you feel beneath your feet are just the wind, or if they are the rhythmic pulsing of a heart that beats in a place where the sun never shines, waiting for the surface to finally give way to the weight of its own curiosity. The coordinates remain elusive, and the witnesses have faded into the background noise of history. But the questions remain. What happened to the line that never hit the bottom? Where did the reanimated creatures come from? And what is currently residing in the dark, 15 miles beneath the pines of Washington? We may never have the answers, because some doors are not meant to be opened, and some holes are not meant to be measured. They are simply there to remind us that for all our technological light, the darkness below is much, much deeper than we ever dared to imagine. The risk of finding the hole is far outweighed by the risk of what might happen if the hole finds us. The legend of the Washington Pit is more than just a ghost story. It is a dark reflection of our own ignorance in a world we thought we had conquered. The fishing line continues its descent in the mind of every person who hears the story. It is a symbol of the thin tether we have to reality. We build our cities and our lives on the assumption that the earth is solid, dependable, and finite. Mel's Hole suggests it is none of those things. It suggests that the planet is a hollow vessel, filled with secrets that have no intention of coming to the surface. Whether it was a collective delusion, a series of misinterpreted events, or a genuine tear in the fabric of the world, the legend remains a dark spot on the map of the known. The conflict is eternal. We want to know the truth, but the truth might be that we are standing on a ceiling that is about to break. As the sun sets over the ridge today, the mystery remains buried. The restricted access may change, the property may change hands, but the void remains. It is a silent witness to our history, a place where the garbage of humanity meets the intelligence of the deep. Whether it is a gateway to another dimension or simply a very deep cave, Mel's hole stands as a monument to the unknown. It is a reminder that we are small, that our science is young, and that the Earth is much older and much hungrier than we ever dared to imagine. The fishing line is still out there, somewhere, descending forever into the dark. It spools out through the miles of rock, past the heat of the mantle, into a silence that has no end, and a darkness that never looks back.